Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment, the unconventional pastor is going to be speaking. Is he right or is he wrong? Maybe both, because that's what he's speaking on tonight in just a moment on the unconventional pastor.
Well, good evening, and it's good to see you again. My name is Bob Greaves. They call me the Unconventional Pastor, and tonight I'm going to be talking about right and wrong. And, this is something that every child growing up in every culture has to deal with and become familiar with just what's meant by it. And it's not always clear to a lot of people how that happens, but we've had many people who've studied things like this that look at the various different confrontations and develop. I'm trying to also do something here where I'm putting on a there we go, trying to get something done on the computer too. There are a number of child development specialists who've really even looked at the aspect of right and wrong and how children come to understand it, and how various different phases of personal development begin to enhance and enlarge upon what the child learns. In other words, just it's not as if we learn right and wrong. We tend to learn right and wrong by going through different phases and stages of development in life, and our understanding of right and wrong kind of shifts and grows and matures through those stages with us. But something, of course, that's been understood very well by many developmental psychologists and other people who study human development. That would be me. In fact, that's one of my degrees is in human development. That when we look at child development, we realize that if somebody has certain traumas or problems or unresolved issues within a particular stage, that it can hamper, it can impede the full and more mature development of the crises and challenges of that particular stage. And then that begins to affect the way they enter into the following stages, and it kind of carries through. They get fixed at an earlier stage in some ways. They don't really, then the following stages modify or alter their sense of certain different types of challenges in life in a manner that's different from the course it would have taken had they not had the unresolved issues from earlier. And this is true with sense of right and wrong. In fact, a few days ago, or a week ago or so, somebody asked me a question about sociopathy and somebody who's psychopathic and somebody who's sociopathic or narcissistic, and they weren't sure what the difference was. And in a sense, a narcissist is somebody who I think what I told him said a narcissist is somebody who is so caught up in themselves that they are unaware of the pain they cause other people. Whereas those people who are sociopathic are often very well aware of the pain they cause other people. They just don't really care. It's not a concern to them, but they can be very aware of it. But although both of them can behave in a manner that is extremely insensitive. But these are, I mentioned that because we don't really even know if what causes some of this sociopathy, whether or not this is something where a trauma doesn't get resolved or something that causes them to be unable to resolve these traumas, or there are things that become traumatic. So It's not always easy to understand these things. However, getting back to the concept of right and wrong, the reason I want to talk about it is because I think that for every person who seeks to develop a healthy spirituality, a person who identifies themselves as a believer in Jesus, is is going to be thinking about these issues of, well, what's right, what's wrong, and where's my moral compass, and what should I do? And I want to say that I really think that in some ways traditional faith can actually get in the way of our moral development in ways that we may not even be aware of, and in ways that stunt it, so that we find that sometimes believers are not really as moral as they even think they are. And sometimes they can be far more immoral than people who have no belief in God in ways they don't even seem to realize. And so it's kind of like, this is not the pot calling the kettle black. This is sometimes, the pot calling the stainless steel kettle black. And the Christian doesn't realize it. And I'm going to try and make a bit of a rational connection between this the problems of moral development and religious concepts and ideas that are not healthy. First of all, when it comes to right and wrong, the child who comes into the world probably isn't even aware of the fact that there's such a thing as right or wrong. There just are things. And the first introduction to the concept of right or wrong is running into something that seems to displease the parent and that seems to possess unpleasant consequences. And it's hard to tell exactly how the child is processing this, because this begins even at a point that is pre-verbal. And some people, would notice that the child will sometimes realize that this word no seems to be a power word. And so some kids will then start actually repeating it back. No, 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 hoping that this word no is, the chances are the child actually perceives it as a magical word. It's a word that you can use and actually make people do things differently. And so the child may actually experiment with that. Now, sometimes if the parent doesn't appreciate the child's level, they can get irrationally irritated at the child saying back to them, no, 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 no. The child does not mean by no what you mean by no. And they are experimenting with a powerful word to see if it'll work. And if it gets you upset, it's working, and you're actually teaching the child to use that word even all the more because it's getting your goat. The best thing to do with that at first is to just totally ignore it and let the word be powerless when they use it. But that brings us back to the concept that originally right and wrong for most children becomes something that is placed upon them. It has something to do with somebody else's requirements and their capacity to bring a sanction or punishment or time out or something, where somebody who seems to be in control or has real control has the ability to dictate what's right and what's wrong. Originally, many children don't understand in any manner, and they can't. That takes time to get there. They wouldn't understand the difference between no that's used because something they're doing is wrong, or something they're doing is not according to our social protocol. Um, you know, uh, I remember I just was reading an example earlier today where, is it immoral to not take your hat off when you come inside? It might not be according to our cultural practices, but the notion here, though, is this: that originally the child is not really clear on moral quality. As far as they know, there's just something they're doing that is not being allowed, and for which there will be um, consequences if they do it. They have not yet really developed a sense of an appreciation for the outcome of their actions. And of course, a matured person who's gone through the developmental stages of life fairly well and healed from the ways in which they haven't will have a moral compass and a moral sense where a great deal of what speaks to them, what tells them what's right and wrong, is their awareness of, well, if I do this, what's the outcome of that? How does that actually affect various people? And that is for them the basis of right and wrong when they get more mature. But the child doesn't begin there. They're not thinking, oh, well, I see what this does to you, mom, or I see what this does to you, dad, or I realize I can't swing this stick in my baby brother's face because it'll poke his eye out. No, they don't see this. They just know that it's a behavior they're not allowed to do without somehow coming across some sort of corrective action. Now, there's a sense in which if there are crises that don't get resolved, emotional problems or traumas that get wrapped up in this, and this can be a problem if the parent is particularly aggravated, irritated when exacting the no's and taking the corrective actions, and maybe even corrective actions is too kind a word. If the child doesn't resolve these issues well, this child may remain forever stuck in a sense of, well, I'll tell you what, right is determined by people who have the power, wrong is determined by people who have the power. And so if I'm going to succeed and survive in life, I had better get myself some power. And that could be an unfortunate outcome of this. But as the child grows older, the child becomes aware of the fact that behavior has outcomes. You can't just do something and, well, there you go, it's done. You do things, and then based on what you've done, there are various different, you sow stuff, you reap stuff. You do something, there's going to be an outcome. It doesn't just stop with the behavior. There's an impact. However, empathy is something that takes time. The child will become aware of their own suffering before they develop a sense of the suffering of others. And this isn't to say that they're unaware of the suffering of others, but that they're more intimately aware of their own suffering than they are of the suffering of others. The suffering of others may be something that for them is very superficial, but for themselves, their own suffering is something that's very deep. And this is a problem that I think even continues into adulthood for many people, in that many times people who have a very poor self-image lose sight of the fact that they are judging themselves based on, I think the way I've seen someone else put it is, it's not fair, it's not honest to judge yourself based on all the intimate knowledge you have of yourself compared to the highlight reel that is the only thing you see in other people's lives. That's not a fair judgment. You don't know what they know about themselves or how they experience themselves. And so this is, you're not apples and oranges. You're not making a fair or proper comparison. And this is something very common for people who really don't like themselves and have not resolved a sense of self-respect and self-love. But when we get stuck at this, it can cause us to be, when at this next stage of understanding right and wrong, we begin to understand, well, this is wrong because it hurts. But since the child begins to be more intimately aware of how they're hurt, there is a sense in which right and wrong does not possess a certain level of fairness to it. Wrong becomes something, well, if that hurts me, it's wrong. And of course, the golden rule could still come into play. And so, well, since it hurts me, I won't do it to you because it would hurt you. But the child isn't yet at a level where they would understand there may be some things that hurt me that don't hurt you. And there may be some things that don't hurt me, but they hurt you. This is not yet the sophisticated level they could be at. But it begins by a definition of, well, whatever hurts me, um, that's got to be wrong. And whatever pleases me has got to be right. And their sense of justice and fairness can sometimes wrap around this rather self centered. And but when I say self-centered, I don't mean selfish. I mean it's a concept and an idea that has been developed with really a focus on self and a very blurry view of others, which is typical for that level of development. It's just the way that it is. Um, and when a child can get stuck at this level, there can be serious problems and consequences uh, to resolving issues at later stages. Now, part of where I'm headed with all of this is that I want to talk about the concept of right and wrong as it develops in a religious mindset. Um, it is at this level that the religious mindset begins to kick in. And I say that because people who study even child development notice that as soon as the child gets to a level where they realize that behavior does possess outcomes that impact people, and as soon as they are aware of this in a way where they're more intimately aware of it as to the way behavior affects them than they are aware of how behavior affects others, that this is a time when the child goes into an almost sacred relationship with rules. um, Rules become something that are hard and fast, black and white. They become things that are simply extrinsically so. The rules are rules just because, well, those are the rules. And they see these as being even external to not just themselves, but even external to the selves of others. They're just the rules, just the way that it is. And they see this almost as with almost sacredness. But something happens in the child at that level that they find it far easier to be angry at the ways in which people violate the rules when they're violating the boundaries of themselves than they are aware of how to be angry when the rules are being violated uh, on other people. This is more true for boys than it is for girls. Girls tend to earlier on develop a sense of not wanting others to be hurt. They do develop a sense of where morality involves the care and maintenance of relationships and of keeping other people inviolate. Girls will learn to not like it when other people are being abused sooner than boys do on average. Both come to that realization, but girls tend to get there sooner. But for the people who get hung up in this, people who get stuck at that phase with certain unresolved issues because of various different traumas or whatever, this then will leak into eventually their religion. And I would want to argue that some of the religious concepts, most of the religious concepts of right and wrong, are actually juvenile attitudes of right and wrong that then the person never really grows out of for whatever reasons, and then later projects them upon God, as if God's sense of right and wrong is, well, I'm in charge here, and you're doing that, and I don't like it. So that's wrong, as if God can define wrong or right based on what pleases him. Now, something that Charles Finney used to say that used to irritate a lot of people, and he used to argue about the foundation of moral obligation. And the only thing that redeemed him in their eyes was the fact that he came to the same conclusions they did about what's right and what's wrong. But he got there very differently. He would even say, God has no right to tell you what's right or what's wrong. He has no right to invent it. What is right and what is wrong has to be based upon the foundation of who we are as beings and what is conducive to our nature and well-being and what is not conducive to our nature and well-being. And he therefore said that the reason why God is the moral lawgiver is because he, better than anyone else, understands what's actually for our well-being. And so he would bring it around that way, but he would deny the fact that God had any right to decide what's right and wrong, as if it was for him some sort of arbitrary choice of, well, I don't like that, so we're going to call that wrong. But in this projection upon God of right and wrong, what happens is that people presume that the way that I feel when people wrong me is the way the God feels when people wrong him, and they project upon God that same level of lack of development and lack of maturity in thinking that God can actually think through the process of the ways that the behavior of other people and look for a far more redemptive response to it all. But it gets worse than this for the person whose development gets stuck there. Not only will a person who gets stuck at that level of development perceive right and wrong as something, well, when that's wrong and you've wronged me, I have the right to be angry and I have the right to lash out, or I have the right to somehow seek vengeance, or I need to do something about it. Unfortunately, at that level, people have a different standard that they use for themselves than they use for others. And most people at this less mature stage of sensing right and wrong will always be able to mitigate the wrongs they do. Well, I was under pressure, I was doing this. And they have ways of making what they do not so wrong. But the wrongs that other do to them that they find inconvenient, these get maximized. These, it's like we have a volume control that we hold on to. When I'm doing something wrong, we turn the volume control down, and when you're doing something wrong, I turn it up, because now we really have something wrong to talk about here. I mean, really wrong. And and so they do this. And when this kind of concept gets projected upon God, God is seen as a moral lawgiver who gets to dictate what's right, what's wrong. And if you cross his path with what's wrong rather than what's right, he's pissed. He has a right to be angry, and he's going to take vengeance. And of course, since he is God, he can not only do this, but he can be right about it, because he never does that which is wrong. And so, this kind of concept is actually, in my opinion, an earlier development that is arrested in terms of moral development and then projected upon God. And then what happens is that what should happen in the life of most people is eventually they grow into various stages where morals become something that are internalized for them. It becomes a value system of their own. Things become wrong as they understand them, and they no longer want to do those wrong things because their own sense of right and wrong tells them they really shouldn't, and they don't want to. And they have developed a sense of the right things to do, and they want to do those things because they are good and right to do. So the moral compass becomes internalized. It goes from that arbitrariness to its whatever displeases the authorities, to a less arbitrary but unfair sense of, well, you're wronging me. Then when you hurt me, then that's wrong, and I get to be angry. But it should grow from there into a sense of the well-being and an appreciation for the value of life and the value of people's boundaries, and of their sense of self and of their own dignity, and a need to in love cherish that and honor that and uphold that for the sake of that which is lovely in them and in yourself. And instead of getting to that point, this gets projected upon God. Now, as I was saying, the normal development, if it is healthy, continues on from this external arbitrary to this internal, I got it, I have a right to be angry, to an internal sense of upholding that which is in the best interests of all, with balance and fairness, genuinely struggled with to be considered. But in the religious mindset, it gets stuck at external. They never really fully develop or are even open to the fully development of a personal moral compass. And the reason is because they see God as the one who has the right to determine for them what's right and what's wrong. And the more you think of anybody else other than yourself as the person most responsible for some task you have to take on, no matter what it is, the more you are going to be lackadaisical, less proactive in developing that task. It's somebody else's responsibility. And so, in this religious mindset, God becomes the moral lawgiver. And in the way, because he's the one who's going to put you in timeout or worse, that you never get to the point where you can completely and truly internalize a sense of a moral compass. This means that you lack the development of understanding and appreciating the sort of things that will actually lead you to want to do right things and not really want to do bad things. To me, as I understand it, the healthy believer in Christ who follows in the footsteps of Jesus is a person who's learning to love his neighbor, learning to love her neighbor, learning to love God, learning to love themselves. And in this love, love does no harm. It doesn't want to do harm. When it sees the good that can be done, it wants to do that. When it sees the harm that might come, oh no, this is not a question of temptation at all. It's a question of, am I sensitive? Am I aware? Am I empathetic? Do I love? And if I can be appropriately sensitive and reasonably aware and have a reasonably accurate and representative perspective, and I love, I just have to do what I want to do and not do the things I don't want to do, and I'm going to do just fine. And it'll be inner directed, inner motivated. But for the person who gets stuck at the level of God as the lawgiver, here's what happens. The child will also go through a stage of right and wrong that involves authorities. And wrong becomes also defined as, that which they say you can't do. And if they catch you, they're going to punish you. So if you do something and it's wrong and they don't catch you, and they don't punish you, you're good. Well, guess what? The way reality works, not everything wrong you do comes back to bite you in the butt. It really doesn't. But if you have this concept of God as being omnipresent, the lawgiver, and you are doing things wrong, and it doesn't always come back to bite you, you begin to justify before God and before yourself and in your own conscience some of these things that you've done that wasn't really all that wrong. In fact, you now find yourself open to even the possibility that even God called you to do it. I think an excellent example of this, and forgive me if I'm pushing a few buttons here. I don't want to, um, uh, I don't want to offend people and their precious faith just because I can. I want to offend their precious faith because there's something about it I find horrendously wrong. And I'm not trying to do that to be mean or vengeful, but here's something that I think is an example of this. The children of Israel, according to this story, accept a covenant that says, part of it says, you shall not murder. You shall not do any murder. And shortly after, by the time they're ready to enter the land, 40 years of practicing this, they're on a commission where they're going to murder men, women, children, livestock, if they're Canaanites. And they're going to do this because these people have offended God, the external lawgiver. So obviously, if the external lawgiver isn't going to punish us for it and is asking us to do it, it can't be wrong. And it is amazing to me how many people can still stand up as religious people and say, this isn't immoral. how they can do this. And I say that the reason they can do this is because their own moral development has been arrested by a foolish faith that has allowed themselves to externalize a sense of right and wrong by giving it to God. And I mean, it sounds nice, it sounds religious, it sounds proper, it sounds worshipful, but it isn't. It's a violation of your own responsibility to be who you are and to own your behavior. And so this sense of right and wrong, when attributed to the external lawgiver, I got to tell you, I think when Jesus came around, he was saying, "I've had enough of this crap. No way. I'll tell you what. I'll give you, the greatest commandment and the second commandment. Love God, love your neighbor. I'll tell you what. Let's do that. A new commandment I give you. You know, let's do away with this Moses thing, this other covenant." And I really see Jesus as having had it up to here with the absurdities and the ludicrousness and the insincerity of the way that they applied it in their lives. This legalistic, law-giving sense of right and wrong and trying to live your life so that you're not offending God. It just wasn't really working for them. It was a sick way of doing it. They didn't realize it, of course, but they couldn't be shaken from it because they didn't want to betray their religion. Now, I can tell you there's a real good reason why there's a number of good reasons why people don't want to forsake their religious mentality. And part of it is, they've already lived their lives making certain decisions, various sacrifices, some that were hard to make in that mentality. And if they break that mentality, this means that all those decisions they made have to be reconsidered. And sometimes that can be a ton of regret. And nobody finds that easy or comfortable to do. And so there's that barrier between them and giving up this religious mentality. The other is this religious mentality really works good in mob mentality. And when the religious congregation, as it were, the group of people who represent the faithful, they're going to expect you to maintain this mentality and they're going to punish you if you break it. Now, I think a good example of how that works is this. I have found that I am a person very willing to look at the biblical text, to look at the life and the sayings of Jesus, and draw from them very different conclusions than that which the traditionalists draw. And, I find that when I talk to atheists, when I talk to sometimes even people from other religions about how I make sense of Jesus, they're fine with it, even if they don't buy it. They don't have any problem with me thinking this through. But oh my goodness, talk to a Christian and suggest to them that when Jesus said this, he didn't mean that. He's not saying that. He's trying to say something else and something other than what their tradition upholds. And my goodness, you're not just going to find that they're disagreeing with you. They're passionately ready to fight you. They're going to be the servant of God and faithful to God, and they're going to fight you tooth and nail. Maybe even kill you if they find you to be a Canaanite, maybe. But I'll tell you what, they'd be willing to do some things that would be otherwise wrong or illegal. I got a comment here, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But this reminds me of a time when I ran into this in a manner that I thought was hyper hypocritical. I was actually involved in pastoring a church in Utica. And the church it's the first time that, although I was originally a Baptist, this is the first time I was, no longer really a Baptist. Well, I'd gone from Wisdom Baptist Tabernacle to actually being independent and loosely associated with the Christian Missionary Alliance, and they had already scheduled me to come to their church along the Hudson to do a karate demonstration and to speak and to preach. And I brought an entire team of people. We spent time, money preparing. We brought wood. We brought stuff. We brought, so there's time and expense involved. And there was an agreed upon amount that they were to pay us for coming to do this. But when we got there and they discovered that I'm no longer actually an independent fundamental Baptist, they were having a moral dilemma as to whether or not they should pay me for what we did. I mean, they let me go through with it. They let me do the karate demonstration. They let me go through with all of the presentation. They let me do the preaching. They let me do the music. We did all of this thing. We brought everybody in. We brought in all the equipment. We finished the night. We brought it all back. When it came time to pick up the check, the guy who's supposed to write the check, he was going through a moral dilemma as to whether or not he should pay me because I'm not an independent fundamental Baptist. And this is God's money. And I'm thinking to myself, he's having a moral problem with keeping his word. He's having a moral problem with paying the laborer for what he's done, all because of this sanction. You see, I was to him a Canaanite. And he was trying to figure out what the right thing is to do, but it was all based on this externalized appointment to God, who he had to honor, and of course, a very independent fundamentalist Baptist view of what that would be. Let me see what our comment is here. Viewer comment. I love the way he portrays the evolution of the human mind, reasoning its own way from selfish view of right and wrong to a more selfless view of right and wrong, based on what the mind learned about right and wrong, based upon how it affects the self. Well, I'm glad you like that. By the way, it's certainly not original to me. It's really in some ways, although I've forgotten many of the particulars. In studying Eric Erikson and his phases of child development, studying people like Piaget, who certainly takes a look at the development of people and particularly how they become who they are, and even looking at even some of Carl Rogers on becoming a person. This is where I got, I think, a lot of those ideas. But thank you. I'm glad I find it meaningful and helpful. I see, in fact, bringing this back to even the concept of sin. I believe that the notion of sin as it is entertained by most Christian traditions, not all of them, but by most Christian traditions, is really based upon an immature concept of missing the mark. And as a result, it is actually an impatience with and an intolerance of people who are not yet adults. It's hating a child because they don't understand like an adult does. And some of these concepts of sin are really juvenile in terms of the way that they approach. There's reasons why people might miss the mark. It takes time to develop that kind of an aim, and it takes time to develop the kind of an eye that can actually see the target. And not only that, but it takes a certain amount of time before you've discovered, even if you're going to shoot an arrow, which is, by the way, where this word sin from the Greek New Testament comes from. It's actually an expression of amartia is a word which really means to miss the mark, and it's a reference to target shooting. You miss the. If you're going to shoot that arrow, you even have to learn before you can get good at it how much you have to lift the arrow up based on the distance it's got to go, because it's going to fall as it goes. And so learning to compensate for the laws of gravity and the various other physical realities is all a part of the maturing ability to hit the mark. And by the way, here's something that I'm going to just throw this in since this came up. Sin. Sin is a word in English which has taken on a meaning entirely of its own. It's no longer euphemistic. It used to be, but it isn't. Now sin is just sin, and we can talk about sin and preach about sin. But that Greek word, miss the mark, was a gentle word. Think about it this way. What if I'm your boss and you're working for me and you do something wrong and I bring you into my office and we're going to talk about it? And let's say that you love to play, and I'm going to use one of Dr. Jones's phrases here, but I'm going to use it for a slightly different purpose. Let's say that you love baseball, and I was there and I saw you hit a home run the other day when you were playing baseball, and now here you are, and after the game I tell you, wow, you hit that one out of the park, and they got this home run. Then I bring them into my office because they work for me, and there's something they didn't do right on the job, and I need to talk to them about it. there's going to be a very different sense of the atmosphere if I bring them into my office and I sit them down and I look them and in the eye and I say, "You did something wrong. What you did to me was a sin." you know, but what if I said to them, here's what you did. I want you to know something. That one wasn't one you didn't knock that one out of the park. I'm using a phrase that in some ways makes it a little friendlier. I'm even talking about something they enjoy doing, baseball. And this one, you didn't knock it out of the park. And it's a way of softening the blow of the accusation while still being very clear about it. It veils the sharpness of it without veiling the clarity. And there's something about the word sin in Greek, to miss the mark, that is a far more gentle, euphemistic, beating around the bush, let's not speak so harshly kind of word. Uh, and of course, the word sin used to mean without, but it finally has come to have its own meaning, and so we have justified sometimes a very harsh treatment of sinners as a result of using this word that stands on its own as a point blank, shoot him in the face kind of word. Um, anyhow, getting back to this development of right and wrong. I really believe that in normal human development outside of religion, that the person who develops a strong and healthy, well developed moral compass is a person who develops this because they develop a genuine sense of empathy, affection, and love for others. Love becomes for them the law, as it were, the rules. And they begin to develop a far more mature sense of where some of the rules can be adjusted or fudged because of the way it's going to impact somebody. And you want to, and since having a good outcome and a meaningful and a useful non-violating outcome on others is preferable. And by the way, by non-violating, I don't mean that the things you do shouldn't ever make people unhappy. Some people need to be unhappy. They need to be unhappy about what they've done. And so sometimes having a response to people like, um, I have a neighbor who dumped some garbage behind my garage, and I called the police to let them know that he's dumping garbage on my yard, and he wasn't happy with that. But I wasn't, I wasn't saying go arrest the guy or whatever. But he needed to know that there's a boundary here, and he needs to know that. Um, and in part of it, I'm hoping that someday there'll be a far more amicable and easygoing kind of thing there. He's kind of difficult person to get along with sometimes. But anyway, without hesitation, I did this. So doing what's in somebody else's best interest doesn't mean always being what they think of as nice, but doing that which they really need. Now, it's kind of arrogant to think that I know what that is, and I really don't. But sorry, I have no other way of doing it but to decide this for myself as best I can, and therefore to do it humbly. Anyhow, getting to the point that it has to do with a sense of love and respect for others. And to me, this is where Jesus comes in, and he comes. He came to fulfill the law. He came to fulfill the law in this way. This law is immature. This law is so external. This law doesn't really have anything to do with where we can grow, where we can go, who we are what we are in essence as human beings made in the image of God. And so this is why Jesus seeks to, and unfortunately failed because the Christian church just turned Christianity back into another form of law, just kind of Moses 2.0. Um, Jesus tried to make this about love. And this is where he was headed. And this is where I see the concept of right and wrong really developing. If you learn to genuinely love and respect other human beings, learn to genuinely love and respect yourself, and seek to find the appropriate balance of behavior in seeking to honor that, And you won't always do it perfectly, but you know what? Doing that perfectly isn't really what's required because and I'll tell you why. Because first of all, you never will ever know exactly really what's always really right. But when people learn that you are a person who's seeking to do what you do because you really do care, they're going to be far more willing to go easy with you in ways in where you may have unwittingly gotten it wrong than they are if you're the one of these people who's kind of an ass about it, and when they do wrong to you, you're ready to just very arbitrarily and severely let them know that they're going to suffer for this. I'll tell you, if you're going to be that kind of a person and you slip up with them and they have the power to bring it upon you, tell you they're going to do that. But love covers a great deal of missing of the mark. And we're all going to be doing a certain amount of that, even unwittingly and unintentionally, as we grow, as we learn to become people who discover really what love really is. This is what I see Jesus is calling us to, a sense of right and wrong that is not based on some sort of moralistic rigidity or a sacrifice of self-thinking so that I'm just going to walk by the precepts of some external God that I'm supposedly following. This is another reason why I believe it's so important for us to recognize that the presence of God is within us. That's where it is. And it's within us in a way where, although we are not one with God as if we are God, the unity that we have with God within us would make it very difficult for us to really know where one begins and the other ends. It's not that clear. It doesn't need to be. And who you are becomes in time so Christ-like that it's like, well, what's the difference in terms of character, in terms of love, in terms of concern and care for your neighbor? That's where it really is supposed to be headed. So there we go. We've talked a little bit here tonight about right and wrong, and we see how it begins in the infant in a manner that is kind of very black and white and very external and very arbitrary and difficult to tell the difference between those things that are wrong because they break social protocol and those things that are wrong because there's something actually immoral about them. And learning to try to deal with the sense of pain, developing empathy, becoming aware of how the difference is between how I am conscious of my own pain and conscious of the pain of others. And eventually, as I grow into a full-fledged adult who has resolved the issues of youth, I become a person who can develop into a person whose sense of right and wrong is based upon nothing other than love. And a recognition that in love we have to do a variety of things that where sometimes it's even helpful to have some precepts that we lovingly accept as a way of at least having agreeable, knowable terms that we're at least working from as we begin to negotiate our interactions. Anyhow, there we are. That's all I have to say tonight about right and wrong. I'm Bob Greaves, the Unconventional Pastor, and I'll see you again on Sunday. Take care. Thank you.
All right, Bob. You are off the air. Curtains closed.